I'm joined today by Plattsburgh State head coach Mike Blaine. And my first question for you, Coach, is I know you've been talking to your players and some former players on the topic of how many of them have experienced, at a minimum, unconstitutional, nonviolent police harassment. And I'm curious to know what feedback you received.
Yeah, I talked to a number of former players and current players at Plattsburgh, at Medaille, at Cornell, at Maryland Eastern Shore, and about 80% of the guys that I had talked to said they had experienced some form of harassment, and that was really, really striking to me to have such a large percentage report that.
Especially when we're talking about younger kids, in many cases college kids. And so my follow-up question is, as we've talked about before, one of the issues we have of many is that if you go back to Germany during Nazi times, long before they started murdering Jews, they were forcing them to wear a Star of David pin, which was nonviolent. But the culture that thought that was acceptable was, of course, the same culture that permitted the Holocaust later. And what we as white people fail to do is connect the culture that permits the, not universal necessarily, but a large majority of black people experience unconstitutional police harassment at a minimum. And we don't connect the culture that permits that. We don't understand it's the same culture that permits the brutality and the murder. And so we always look only at the murders and say, well, these things are isolated. And we wonder as white people, is this not some type of overreaction? And so, of course, once you connect the culture, it looks a little bit different. So I'm curious, you now having seen a little bit of data on the topic, do you consider this problem to be isolated, or would you call it more pervasive and something we need to address?
I would say that any sample size that exhibits 80% of a negative response to a situation is obviously a pervasive. That was very overwhelming statistical evidence to me, and something that I was really taken aback by, as you talked about earlier, just how many young people. This is not, these are current or recently former college student athletes. So we're talking about a sample size of young men, in their early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s at most. So for that many to have experienced that type of difficulty this early in their lives, it's a really, really striking piece of data.
Yeah, and the thing is that as way too often as white people, we will, like a lot of my black friends who are college educated and so on and so forth, white people will tell them, and they don't understand, it's not only passive aggressive, but it's racist. They'll say, oh, well, you're one of the good ones, right? There's like an expectation of a black person's behavior to be unacceptable in the eyes of a white person. And it's important to understand that obviously we're talking about educated people, right? And so I don't know if you know Van Green, but he's assistant coach at Rice. He played at Columbia. And, he's been harassed bunches of times. And he's still a pretty young guy, and he goes to a nice hotel. They ask him, are you sure you're at the right hotel? And that type of thing. And his point was that, it's so easy for us to say, well, this is a problem of undereducated black people not behaving well, or this is a problem in the South. It's not, that stuff doesn't happen in New York and California. And, Van's point was that I'm an Ivy League grad with a master's from Rice, and I've been harassed a bunch. So perhaps we shouldn't think of it as a regional thing or a class thing or an education thing. And so I obviously agree with you completely that the problem's not isolated. Not only is it not isolated statistically, but it's not isolated based on a variety of other factors that white people use to attempt to dismiss this as a major problem. And then I got another thing for you, out of curiosity. Have you, as a white man, ever had your constitutional rights abused by the police?
I have not.
Yeah, and the vast majority of white people haven't. I have, but it was in a black neighborhood every time. I was driving in a black neighborhood. And so, of course, even the times I've been unconstitutionally harassed by the police were based on their racism toward black people. because they couldn't think of a reason for a white man to be in a black neighborhood that was non-nefarious. And so, yeah, the clear majority of my white friends have never had that happen to them, ever. Never been pulled over for no reason, never been walking down the street with their friends, minding their own business, and the cops pull over and ask for ID. And it was really striking to me that the entire Mike Brown situation came to pass because the Mike Brown may have thought the cop was there regarding the strong arm robbery he had just committed a few moments ago. But in fact, the cop had no clue that that event had occurred. And the cop was bothering him for walking in the street instead of on the sidewalk. Well, in Houston, Texas, we have massive oak trees. That's where I'm from. And the oak trees rip up the sidewalks. The roots rip up the sidewalks. And as a former player who played way too much on concrete growing up, I got bad wheels, bad ankles, bad knees. And it's hard for me to walk on crooked, broken sidewalks. So I always walk on the street. And when Mike Brown was killed, I had a flashback to all the times the cops rolled past me. And they never, ever told me to get on the sidewalk. That was the initiation of that particular conflict, was them telling Mike Brown, get on the sidewalk. Well, again, as a white man, I've walked in the street more times than I can count. I've had police officers roll by as I was walking in the street more times than I can count. And I never, ever in my life have had them give me a hard time about that. So I'm not surprised to hear you say that your experience with the police have been quite a bit different than what black players and former players' experience have been. And then from here, I'm just curious to know what else is on your mind.
Well, just in terms of reaching out to some current and former players, I think you made a great point that these are young men from multiple different programs, from different states, cities, towns, all over the country, and so the spread of that issue was really, really striking to me. And the other thing that really kind of has been something that I've thought about a lot, certainly recently, but need to think about more often, and really kind of came to my forefront during my time at Maryland East as an assistant at Maryland Eastern Shore is, I think so often we hear about how much we've done and as a people to try to combat racism and try to improve things. But I think too often we don't think about how much farther we need to go. And that's something that I've thought a lot about, is that whatever, what good we've done, there's still so much more that needs to be done in order to make sure that these types of things don't happen to any young person.
So it sounds like you're saying that, I certainly grew up in a predominantly white area and went to a nearly all white school. And I certainly had been misled to believe that these types of things don't happen anymore, right? It's not the 1950s, Bull Connor, it's not a sheriff. And we've made so much progress as a society. And it sounds like when you got to Maryland Eastern Shore, that was a little bit of an awakening for you, and probably more than a little bit shocking to discover that maybe we have not made quite as much progress as we as white people prefer to imagine.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I think we can all do, is all continue to look for ways to do more, do better, help more. And as coaches, we certainly always want to put the best interests of the young men in our program first and foremost in our lives. And so in order to do that, we need to look for ways that we can continue to help and continue to push forward along this path.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time and your thoughts on that, because it's a personal frustration of mine that we like to talk about the progress, but not about the hard work left to do. And it's almost like we're using progress as like a windshield wiper to wipe away the very legitimate. It's like, what are you talking about? Look at all the progress. It's like a shut up and, get back in your place. And we've made lots of progress. And why are you only focused on the negative? And unfortunately, we as white people get get caught up in that circular reasoning and sort of a bubble, whether it's social media or our groups of friends. And, it's really important for us as white people to diversify the people we're talking to. And like, I know that working at Maryland Eastern Shore, there must have been a lot of times you were like, wait, what just happened to your uncle? Like, I didn't have any of that. Didn't happen to any of my friends' uncles, and all those types of stories. So, well, I know that you got a little baby and a wife waiting on you for dinner, and I have beer to drink. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. But Coach Blaine, I really appreciate your time, and we'll stay in touch. And I'm extremely happy that you're in. It needs to be a two-way fight, in my view. We as white people need to listen to black people and speak to white people. It's not just one or the other. And so I'm glad to know that you've been listening to your black friends and players and former players for a long time. And I'm glad that you're speaking up. And I know you'll continue to do so. So again, thanks for being in this fight with us, and thanks for your time.
Thanks very much for having me, Pete.